Welcome to the Private School Leader Podcast, where private school leaders learn how to thrive and not just survive as they serve and lead their schools. I strongly believe that it is possible to have a long and happy and fulfilling career as a private school leader. And my passion is to help you figure out exactly how to do just that right here on the Private School Leader Podcast. And I'm your host, Mark Minkus. So if you're listening to this in real time, it's mid-June, the students are gone, graduation is over, the building has gotten quiet, and if you are like most private school leaders, at some point in the next few weeks, you are going to sit down with a bottle of water or a cup of coffee. You're going to pull out a pen, and you're going to pull out last year's Employee Handbook, because summer is handbook season. One of my least favorite seasons, by the way. And, this is the time of year when we look at the employee handbook, we look at the student handbook, and we review the policies and maybe update the language and revise, and we're getting prepared for the upcoming school year. However, I want to make a confession here, and I want to tell you how I used to update the employee handbook. And then I want you to be honest and say to yourself, nod your head to yourself, if this sounds familiar. So this was me. It would be that a teacher would do something that was really annoying or frustrating during the year, and maybe they would show up late repeatedly, or they didn't meet the deadline for getting their report cards or their progress report in on time. Maybe they sent emails to parents with like a grammatical error or, using capital letters or something like that. Maybe they showed up late consistently for a recess duty or lunch duty, or maybe they didn't communicate with parents when those small issues started to bubble up. And so I'm thinking back on the school year, and I'm thinking about these frustrating things that the teachers did. And then what would I do? I would write a new policy, or I'd add another few sentences, or sometimes I'd add a paragraph to the handbook, and I would make it more specific, or maybe I would add another consequence. And then all of a sudden, I stop and notice that my employee handbook doesn't look like what I want it to look like. It doesn't look like a professional guidebook. This is what professionalism looks like at our school. It looks more like a legal document that I wrote to try to coerce and control the worst employee that I've ever had in the history of the school. And so that's my confession, that I used to do that. I want to try and think about handbook season differently this year. And so on today's episode of the Private School Leader Podcast, I want to try to persuade you that your employee handbook revisions should be written for your best teachers, not your worst teachers. So before we jump into that, I want to give you a free gift to say thank you for listening to the podcast. I have a free guide for you called 5 Strategies to Help You Work with Difficult Parents. And we know that working with parents is part of the job, and most of the parents at our school are great, but some of them can be very demanding and emotional and difficult. And so I've created this free guide, and it will give you the tools you need to build better relationships and have better meetings with the difficult parents at your school. So if you go to theprivateschoolleader.com/parents, you can grab this free PDF guide. Again, that's 5 Strategies to Help You Work with Difficult Parents. That's free for you at theprivateschoolleader.com/parents. And then, speaking of summer, I was mentioning summer earlier and the things that we do during the summer. One of the things that we do, hopefully, is to try and grow a little bit at some point in the summer. And that's especially true if you had a difficult year last year. If you think back and you were overwhelmed at times or exhausted at times, frustrated that the tyranny of the urgent was kind of controlling so many of your days and seeping into your weeknights and your weekends, and feeling guilty about your family kind of getting what was left over of you, and just feeling like you weren't able to be productive and get to your work until the teachers and the kids went home for the day. If any of that's resonating with you, I want to work with you this summer. I have 2 summer coaching spots open, and I would love to work with you this summer because I believe that I can help you make this next school year the best school year of your career. I don't expect you to take my word for it. I just encourage you to take 5 minutes and go to theprivateschoolleader.com/coaching and read a few of those testimonials. I can get you those results. I've walked the path before you. I can give you a plan. We can close the gap between the life you have and the life you want. I just need you to email me, mark.o.minkus@gmail.com, and we'll set up a free 20-minute call on Zoom. And I just want to meet you and hear more about your biggest struggle or your biggest goal, and we'll go from there. So 2 summer coaching spots open. Want you to grab one before they're gone. So I told you that I want to try to persuade you that your employee handbook revisions should be written for your best teachers, not your worst teachers. And so I want to divide this episode up into a couple of parts. And the first part that I want to talk about is what I'm going to call the handbook trap. So there's this trap that I think a lot of us fall into when we're making revisions to our handbook. And I kind of alluded to it at the top of the episode. And so I think that the trap is creating a handbook that's full of exceptions instead of expectations. So let me hit you with that again. Creating a handbook that's full of exceptions instead of expectations. And so think about how, I'm going to tell you how my employee handbooks at my schools typically evolved. Think about how the employee handbook at your school has evolved. We don't usually sit down, or usually we inherit a handbook from our predecessor, but I don't think it's very common for a leadership team to sit down and say, okay, let's create an inspiring document that reflects who we want to be as professionals. Like, I don't know, maybe there's schools out there. I hope there are. I'd love to hear from you. But I think often what happens is, even if that did happen at the beginning when the school was founded, that what tends to happen over time, the way that evolution goes is that it's kind of like, hey, remember that teacher that would leave 15 minutes early every Friday? We need to write a policy for that. Or, hey, remember that teacher that didn't turn his grades in on time? We need a policy for that. And remember that teacher when she called off at the last minute? Well, we need to tighten up the policy on that and increase the consequence for that. And then what happens is, over time, our handbook becomes like this collection of reactions. You know, the teachers do things during the school year, and then we react and we make sure that that gets into the employee handbook for the next year. And the policy is written with one employee in mind, and that's how we land on exceptions instead of expectations. So that is the handbook trap that I think a lot of us fall into. But what I want to talk about is the price tag of this trap. What does it cost you as a leader? What does it cost your school to keep running it back each summer and having your employee handbook revisions be based on your worst teacher instead of your best teacher? Okay, the price tag of this approach, of this trap. Price tag number 1, your handbook becomes a joke. Okay? Your handbook becomes a joke. Teachers that have been there for a long time, they start naming the policies after people. You know this happens. If you haven't heard this, I'm telling you that this is happening at many of the schools of the audience for the Private School Leader podcast, okay? And so there are veteran teachers that will point to a policy in the handbook and be, well, that's the Amanda policy. Amanda doesn't even work here anymore. The policy's still in there. That's the George policy. George, he hasn't worked here in years, but you know, they know that that's where that came from. And so when we get reactionary, when it's like at the doctor, you know, when they hit the little hammer into your knee to check your reflexes. When we just have this reflexive reaction to the stuff that happens during a school year, and then that stuff shows up in our employee handbook, we run the risk of our handbook becoming a joke. Okay, so that's the price tag. Price tag number one. Price tag number two of the handbook trap is that your strongest teachers start to feel micromanaged. Your strongest teachers start to feel micromanaged. So your star teachers, you can picture them right now, your stars. They read the handbook, and honestly, because I've had these conversations with my star teachers after they've read the handbook and after they've read my revisions during the summer to a handbook. And I'm picturing a couple of them right now and remembering them asking, who are these rules for? Like, I would never do that. Why are we spending so much time talking about stuff that any reasonable professional educator should already know? And then I'm thinking in my head, and maybe you are too, it's like, well, not all of them are professional educators, and that's why we need these policies. But like I said before, I'm going to challenge your thinking on that. I'm admitting that I used to do it this way. Towards the end of my career, I changed the way that I did it, and I want you to pause and reflect about how you've been doing it and think about possibly doing it differently. So that brings us to price tag number 3. Price tag number 3 for this handbook trap is this kind of handbook makes it more difficult to build a strong culture. And so when we write these policies that are for individual people, let's say it's for the bottom 5% or the bottom 10% as far as our performers, we often frustrate the top 90%. And I used to think that this would make it easier to build a healthy culture because I could hold people accountable, but I've found that it actually has a negative impact on teacher morale, because my best teachers don't want more rules. They just want me to trust them. They want clarity on what am I supposed to do? What is the job? What does professionalism look like here at our school? And then they want autonomy with accountability. Autonomy with accountability is huge. And they want us to hold everyone accountable, because the number one thing that has frustrated my star teachers over the years has been when I did not have the courage to hold the poor behavior teachers, the poor performers, the ones that weren't being professional. I was not having those courageous conversations to hold them accountable. And then that damages trust. It negatively impacts teacher morale. It negatively impacts culture. And so that was on me. And I thought that I could kind of handbook my way out of the problem, if you understand what I'm saying. And so I want to make an application here that we will all understand. And that is, almost all of us started out in the classroom. And if you didn't come up through as an educator, you've certainly covered enough classes as a leader to know what I'm talking about. But we need to remember that great teachers and great students need similar things. And so what I'm getting at is we need to remember what we did in the classroom. And so I want you to imagine a teacher walking into his or her classroom on the first day of school, and they're saying to their students, okay, here are the class rules, and I'm creating these class rules based on the 3 most difficult students I've ever taught in my career. And that's what the class rules are that are posted. Now, that would be ridiculous, and you would never do that as a teacher, okay? But that's kind of what we're doing with our handbook when we're stuffing it full of policies that are based on bad behavior and based on outliers. And so what good teachers do, what you did when you were in the classroom, you don't build your classroom procedures based on your most challenging students, based on your most, the behavior misbehaving students, you build clear expectations that are for everyone. And then for the kids who can't meet those on their own without some support, we give them support. And if that support falls outside the realm of quote unquote normal differentiation, then maybe they need intervention. Maybe they need accommodations. And so we know how to do this. That's what effective teachers do. That's also what effective leaders do, is let's make the goal clear. This is what professionalism looks like at our school. And then assume that most can get there on their own. You're paying attention. And then the outliers are kind of self-identifying with their behavior, their performance. And then we're providing the support, the intervention, the clarity, the accountability, the conversations that they need. That's what we did when we were in the classroom. And so the handbook, we want it to establish, professional norms, essential expectations. A lot of schools are using essential expectations now as part of the evaluation process. The standards, these are the shared commitments. And then as the leader, we're going to coach and support and differentiate and hold accountable to help those individual teachers who are falling short of the clearly communicated standards to get them up to the standard. I think that I made it harder than it needed to be because I did that in my classroom, but I kind of shrank sometimes in the moment when it came to doing the same thing with my teachers. So I want to give you 4 principles for better handbook revisions this summer. 4 principles for better handbook revisions. And then I'll wrap it up with some questions that you can ask yourself while going through and doing your revisions. So principle number 1 is write expectations, not loophole prevention policies. I know that's a mouthful. I tried to shorten that up, but let me hit you with that again. Principle number 1, when we're revising our handbooks, write expectations, not loophole prevention policies. And I've got to be honest, I did a lot of that, shoving loophole prevention policies in there. And so I thought that one was a little bit vague or obtuse. And so I thought, okay, let me lean into getting you some specific examples. And when I use ChatGPT, I want to, or AI, I want to acknowledge that. And so for these 3 examples, I asked ChatGPT told ChatGPT what I was doing and said, give me some examples of, instead of this, try this when it comes to policies and this idea of us, when our handbooks kind of, it kind of becomes like this legal document instead of, that tries to anticipate every possible violation that a teacher could possibly do instead of, professional expectations. And the problem is that we're never going to write enough policies to outsmart someone who is an uncommitted, unmotivated, lazy, slacker employee. We can't out-policy them, okay? So, like I said, I asked AI for some examples. So here's example number 1, dress code. So instead of, let's pretend that this is a policy that's in our employee handbook. Quote, teachers may not wear jeans except on designated spirit days, must not wear athletic shoes unless participating in physical activity, and must maintain professional appearance at all times. That sounds a little familiar, okay? What we could try is, quote, teachers are expected to dress in a manner that reflects professionalism, supports the school mission, and serves as a positive example for students. So I didn't get into sneakers or jeans or what have you. And again, I'm not saying that you scrap your professional employee dress code. I'm trying to get you to pick up on the theme that we don't have to try to continue to write policies that are going to prevent people from finding loopholes. Keep writing policies that are going to get people to perform better or behave better. So example number 2, arrival and attendance. So again, asked AI, give me an example of this and then try this instead. So here's the one that might appear in our handbooks. Teachers must arrive at 7:45 a.m., may not leave before 3:30 p.m. without prior written approval from an administrator. Excessive tardiness may result in disciplinary action, end quote. That one sounds familiar to me too. Instead, we could try teachers are expected to be present, prepared, and available to fulfill their professional responsibilities and support students, families, and colleagues throughout the school day. Now, somewhere else in your handbook, the school hours, or it's just going to say, teacher arrival time, teacher departure time. Again, we're trying to treat them like professionals and not micromanage every single detail. And I'll get to, I know that there's some objections that I need to crush. I'll do that in a few minutes because I had to crush them for myself. So hang in there with me. One more example. This is about parent communication. So instead of, quote, teachers must notify parents within 48 hours when a student earns below a C, receives 2 missing assignments, demonstrates behavioral concerns, or shows signs of academic difficulty. That one is stuffed full of 5 different things that says a teacher must notify a parent within 48 hours when that happens. I'm just reading that and I'm like, okay, I'm thinking of which teacher didn't do the thing, and that's why we wrote that policy. But instead, what we could try is teachers are expected to maintain proactive, timely communication with families regarding student progress, concerns, and successes, end quote. And listen, I know that the main objection that I need to crush is, yeah, but wait a second. If it's not in the handbook, I can't enforce it with the person. I used to believe that too, but I don't agree with that anymore. And if you hang in there with me, I will explain how we are going to do that without having this overstuffed legal document and still be able to hold our teachers accountable. Okay? Just trust me. So principle number 1 is that we're trying to write expectations, not loophole prevention policies. Okay. And I gave you some examples. Then principle number 2, use aspirational language for the teacher you want to clone. Use aspirational language for the teacher you want to clone. So I want you to think of just immediately who comes to mind. If you could clone one teacher and that would be all your teachers, who would it be? And when I think of teachers that I would want to clone from my career, it's like the things that pop into my mind are like work ethic, positive attitude, teaching skill, highly engaged learning, hands-on, optimistic, fun. They're a person that's an how can I help kind of person, will do anything for a kid, very student-centered, et cetera, et cetera. That's our stars. Those are the ones we want to clone. Now, if I'm using language, I kind of want to think about how would I be describing that teacher. So if that's a teacher that I want to clone, then logically what that means is that the other teachers on my campus, I would be thrilled if they all kind of check those boxes as well, and more than check those boxes, if they aspired to that level of professionalism and performance in the school. And so I think that if we can use some aspirational language in our handbook instead of it sounding like, a penal code for the state of whatever, okay, that we're going to give them a clearer picture and maybe get our teachers to act like professionals. So we want our handbooks to describe what professionalism looks like at our school, not just a list of the things that they're prohibited from doing. You see what I'm getting at? It's not our handbook, and I'm guilty. Our handbook is not a behavior management system. I'm guilty of using my employee handbook, attempting to use it as a behavior management system. I'll tell you this, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. And so Principle 2, what we're going to do is we're going to try to write it for the teacher that I wish I could clone, and write it for the teachers I want to attract to my school, and also write this handbook for the kind of culture I want to create. So let's start thinking about our employee handbook through the lens of aspirational instead of reactive to the rule breakers from this past school year. Okay, principle number 3 is assume professionalism. And I think one of the greatest compliments that we can give to our employees is to trust them. And if we write policies that assume professionalism, and instead of writing policies that assume that they're going to be immature and lazy and sneak around and have bad intentions and try to break the rules every time we turn our backs, we are going to have more employees striving to be professionals. Because I think that if we just assume, we have to trust but verify, okay? I'm not saying blind trust. Trust but verify. If we have professional educators that generally want to do good work, and that's our starting point, awesome. Will some of them disappoint us? Of course they will. But then that's where we come in as the leaders to coach them up, to clarify, to remind, to sometimes give a consequence and hold them accountable. But we can't design our whole handbook around those exceptions. I know I'm beating a dead horse here, but I want to make sure that the message comes through loud and clear. And then principle number 4 for our handbook revisions, the leader needs to handle the exceptions. And I'm raising my hand here. I'm guilty. This is where I used to get stuck. This is the thing I said I was going to get to. This scary part of, well, if it's not in the handbook, I can't address it. And a quick story, my first year as a principal, I'll never forget this kid. His name's Justin, 7th grader. It was the period before lunch. It was social studies class. It was the classroom right by the main entrance of the school. So this is like 1992 or 93. And Justin, somehow, this is before cell phones, I think he used the payphone in the lobby. He ordered a pizza and had it delivered to his social studies class. And so I hear about this. The teacher buzzes the office, and I go down there, and I pull Justin out into the hallway, and he says, well, Mr. Minkus, it doesn't say in the handbook that I can't order a pizza. And I don't remember exactly how I handled that. I think I probably handled it well, that it was a distraction to learning or something like that. But when we take, when we view things through the lens of fear, that we can't enforce things that unless they're there, then what we're trying to do is we're trying to replace leadership with rules. The handbook is supposed to be a guide, and then when the unusual situations arise, when the outlier behavior happens, when the non-cooperation or non-compliance happens, then we as the leaders have to step up and have courageous conversations and coach and support and show empathy and remind and clarify and hold people accountable and all of the things that we don't like to do. But the answer to all of our personnel problems is not another paragraph in the handbook. It's not. And I used to think that it was. And I did that. But I tried to change that. I did change that later in my career, and it made a big difference. And so I just want to wrap up this episode by giving you, let's see how many questions, 5 questions to ask yourself during handbook season. And I know I'm giving you a lot of stuff here today. All of this will be there for you in the show notes if you just go to theprivateschoolleader.com/episode 191. It'll be there for you, including these questions. So just wrap it up with these 5 questions. As you revise your handbook this summer, ask yourself these questions. Question number 1, was this policy created because of one person? And if so, if the answer is yes, is it really necessary to be in here? Okay, so question number 1, was this policy created because of one person? Question number 2, does this policy describe what professionalism looks like at our school? Question number 3, does this policy communicate trust or suspicion? So when you read it, pretend that you're that teacher, that star teacher. When they are reading it, does the policy that they're reading communicate trust or suspicion? Is it like a game of gotcha? So again, there's no right or wrong answers to these things. These are things to get you thinking as you're revising the handbook. Question number 4, does this describe the culture we want to create? Does this handbook jive with, is it the vibe that we're going for as far as our culture? And then question number 5, and I'm going to raise my hand here. I'm guilty as charged with question number 5 before I even ask it. Question number 5, am I writing a handbook policy? Am I writing a handbook or am I avoiding a difficult conversation? Like I said, raising my hand here, guilty. Am I writing a handbook or am I trying to avoid a difficult conversation? So the takeaways from today, principle number 1, we're trying to avoid this handbook trap. And so the 4 principles of our handbook revisions this summer: number 1, write expectations, not loophole prevention policies. Number 2, use aspirational language for the teacher you want to clone. Principle number 3 is assume professionalism. And then principle number 4, the leader handles the exceptions. And your call to action for this episode is that when this summer you're revising your employee handbook, ask yourself these 5 questions. Was this policy created because of one person? Does this policy describe what professionalism looks like at our school? Does this policy communicate trust or suspicion? Does this describe the culture we want to create? And am I writing a handbook or avoiding a difficult conversation? All of those principles, all of those questions will be at theprivateschoolleader.com/episode 191. And I just want to quickly remind you that a free gift for you, 5 strategies to help you work with difficult parents. Grab that at theprivateschoolleader.com/parents. And then a final reminder that I have 2 coaching spots left. I want you to grab one before they're gone. Just email me, mark.o.minkus@gmail.com. And I want to help make this next school year the best year of your career. I want to help you close the gap between the life you have and the life you want at school and at home. I can help you do that. So if you get help from the podcast, please share the link with another leader in your life or a rising leader at your school. And I appreciate you. I'm so thankful for all of the hard work that you do for those lucky kids and teachers at your school. I just want to say that, you've wrapped up your school year and that's a tremendous accomplishment. So congratulations. And I really appreciate you taking some of your precious time to join me here today. And I'll see you next time right here on the Private School Leader Podcast. And until then, always remember to serve first, lead second, and make a difference.